I pulled over to the shoulder of the road as my car made a final, sputtering wheeze before the engine died completely. Rain hammered against the roof and windshield with growing intensity. Just my luck. Miles from town on this forgotten country road, and now this. I tried the ignition again. Nothing but a sad clicking sound. The dashboard lights flickered once, then went dark. Perfect. I grabbed my phone from the cup holder and pressed the power button, already knowing what I'd see. Black screen. Dead battery. Come on, I muttered, trying again despite knowing it was pointless. The rain wasn't letting up. If anything, it was getting worse, transforming the road into a small river. I sat there for a few minutes weighing my options, which were painfully few. Walking in this downpour meant getting soaked to the bone within seconds, but sitting in my car wouldn't get me anywhere. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, knowing it would offer little protection. With a deep breath, I threw open the door and stepped out into the storm. The rain hit me like ice water. Within moments, my clothes were saturated, clinging uncomfortably to my skin. I squinted through the curtain of water, trying to get my bearings. Trees lined both sides of the road, their branches swaying violently in the wind. I didn't even know which direction would lead to civilization. That's when I saw it. Through a gap in the trees to my right, lights. Warm, yellow lights that promised shelter. I hurried toward them, pushing through soaked underbrush, my shoes sinking into mud with each step. The trees gave way to reveal an imposing Victorian mansion set back from the road. 3 stories of dark stone and timber with a steep roof and tall, narrow windows. Light glowed from several of them, cutting through the gloom of the storm. A covered porch wrapped around the front, offering the promise of temporary relief from the rain. I rushed up the gravel path to the front steps, taking them 2 at a time until I reached the massive wooden door with an ornate brass knocker. I pounded it several times, the sound echoing inside. When no one answered after a minute, I tried the handle. It turned easily in my hand. The heavy door swung inward without a sound. "Hello?" I called out, hesitating on the threshold. "Sorry to intrude, but my car broke down. Is anyone home?" My voice carried through the entryway but brought no response. Just silence. I stepped inside, dripping all over the polished hardwood floor. Guilt mixed with relief as warmth enveloped me. The entryway opened into a grand foyer with a sweeping staircase that curved upward to the 2nd floor. To my left and right, doorways led deeper into the house. "Hello?" I tried again. "I just need to use a phone if you have one." Still nothing. I moved further inside, noticing details that struck me as odd. Despite the apparent age of the mansion, everything looked immaculate. Fresh flowers sat in crystal vases on side tables. The hardwood gleamed with recent polish. Not a cobweb hung in the corners, not a speck of dust on any surface. Yet the house felt empty. Not abandoned. Clearly someone maintained it, but vacant at this moment. Candles flickered in ornate wall sconces, casting a warm glow that illuminated the hallway. They were all lit, every single one, which seemed strange if no one was home. Who would light dozens of candles and then leave? I followed the hallway, leaving wet footprints behind me. The walls were covered in rich, burgundy wallpaper and hung with oil paintings in gilded frames, landscapes and stern-faced portraits of people from another century. "I'm just looking for a phone," I called out, feeling increasingly uncomfortable about wandering through someone's home uninvited. A rich aroma caught my attention. Food. I followed it to a dining room where an unexpected sight awaited me. A large oak table dominated the space, set with fine china and crystal glasses. Steam rose from several covered dishes placed in the center. I lifted one of the silver lids. Roast beef, perfectly cooked, with juices still pooling around it. Another dish contained roasted potatoes. A third held green beans. The food was hot, as if someone had just prepared it moments ago. My stomach rumbled, reminding me I hadn't eaten since breakfast. But this was beyond strange. Who cooks a meal like this and then disappears before eating it? I replaced the lid and backed away from the table. That's when I first noticed the sound. A soft, rhythmic ticking coming from somewhere deeper in the house. Actually, not just one ticking sound, but many, slightly out of sync with each other. Following the sound, I moved through a doorway into what appeared to be a sitting room. The source of the ticking became immediately apparent. Clocks, dozens of them. They covered nearly every surface. Grandfather clocks standing sentinel against the walls, cuckoo clocks hanging between paintings, mantel clocks arranged on shelves, and smaller desk clocks on tables. Each displayed a different time. One showed 3:15, another nearly midnight, a third just past 8. Their ticking filled the room in a discordant symphony, each keeping its own beat, none in harmony with the others. The longer I stood there, the more the irregular rhythm seemed to bore into my skull. A dull ache formed behind my eyes, gradually intensifying into a throbbing headache. I rubbed my temples. None of this made any sense. The pristine condition of the house, the hot food, the burning candles, all suggested someone should be here, but the place felt utterly deserted. Or did it? Something about the atmosphere had shifted since I'd entered. At first, I'd felt I was alone in someone's absence. Now, a new sensation crept over me, the feeling of being watched. I turned around quickly, half expecting to find someone standing in the doorway. The hallway remained empty, but the feeling didn't subside. My wet clothes clung uncomfortably to my skin, and I shivered, from cold or unease, I couldn't tell which. The clocks continued their maddening, arrhythmic ticking, each insisting on its own version of the correct time. I needed answers. Someone owned this place. Someone had prepared that meal and lit those candles. Someone could help me get back to town. I looked toward the grand staircase visible through the doorway. Maybe the owners were upstairs and hadn't heard me. That had to be it. A simple explanation for this increasingly bizarre situation. The ticking seemed to grow louder as I made my decision. I'd go upstairs, find whoever lived here, explain my situation, and hopefully use their phone to call for help. Nothing strange about that. Just a stranded traveler seeking assistance. I stepped out of the clock-filled sitting room, the pounding in my head momentarily lessening as I moved away from the cacophony of ticking. With one last glance at the perfectly prepared but abandoned meal, I headed toward the grand staircase, determined to solve the mystery of this peculiar place. I ascended the grand staircase, my wet shoes leaving damp footprints on the polished wood. The stairs creaked under my weight, despite the immaculate condition of everything else. At the top landing, a long hallway stretched in both directions, lined with doors and lit by the same flickering candles I'd seen downstairs. My headache had eased slightly since leaving the room full of ticking clocks, but that feeling of being watched had only intensified. I stood motionless for a moment, listening. The storm continued its assault outside, rain lashing against the windows, but inside the house was unnaturally quiet except for the distant ticking. "Hello?" I called out again, my voice sounding small in the vast space. "Is anyone here?" No answer came back. I turned left and began making my way down the hallway, running my fingers along the wallpaper. It felt expensive, thick, and textured. The doors were spaced evenly apart, each made of dark, heavy wood with ornate brass handles. I opened the first door I came to, revealing a bedroom. Like everything else in this house, it was immaculately maintained. A 4-poster bed dominated the center of the room, its sheets turned down as if waiting for someone to climb in. Fresh flowers sat on the nightstand. A wardrobe stood against one wall, its doors slightly ajar. Curiosity pulled me toward it. I slid the wardrobe door open further to find clothes hanging inside. Men's clothes that looked both expensive and oddly old-fashioned. A suit jacket, several pressed shirts, trousers with suspenders. On a shelf above them sat a pair of polished leather shoes. Everything was arranged as if for a guest who was expected to arrive at any moment. I backed away and returned to the hallway, moving on to the next door. This room contained another bedroom, this one clearly meant for a woman. A vanity table with an ornate mirror held crystal bottles of perfume and silver-backed brushes. A silk nightgown was laid across the bed, and matching slippers waited neatly on the floor beside it. The third bedroom was smaller, furnished for a child with a single bed and toys arranged on shelves. A teddy bear with glass eyes sat propped against the pillows, its stitched mouth forming what seemed like a frown. Something about those glass eyes tracking me made me shut that door quickly. I continued down the hallway to the fourth door. This bedroom was larger than the others, possibly the master suite. Like the rest of the house, it was pristine, with heavy curtains framing tall windows that looked out into the stormy night. A massive canopy bed stood against one wall, its dark wood matching the other furniture in the room. But what caught my attention immediately was the grandfather clock. It stood in the corner, at least 7 feet tall, crafted from rich mahogany with intricate carvings along its frame. Unlike the dozens of clocks downstairs, this one was completely silent. No ticking, no movement of its pendulum. The hands were frozen at exactly 12 o'clock. I walked closer, drawn to it despite my growing unease. Something about it seemed to pull me forward, like a magnet. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, the wood polished to a high shine, the face of the clock painted with delicate flowers and Roman numerals. Yet despite its beauty, it emanated a strange coldness that I couldn't explain. The glass case covering the clock face was slightly ajar. Without really thinking about what I was doing, I opened it further and looked inside. Hanging from a small hook near the 12 was a brass key. It wasn't particularly ornate, just a simple skeleton key with an elaborate bow. But like the clock itself, it seemed to call to me. I reached in and took the key, feeling its weight in my palm. It was heavier than it looked, the metal cold against my skin. The moment my fingers closed around it, the entire house seemed to hold its breath. The distant ticking I'd heard since entering suddenly stopped, leaving an eerie silence that lasted only seconds before it was broken by a sound that made my blood run cold. From somewhere downstairs, a clock began to chime. Each deep, resonant tone vibrated through the floorboards beneath my feet. 1, 2, 3. I counted each strike, a mounting sense of dread filling me as the count increased. 4, 5, 6. The chimes grew louder, each one seeming to shake the very foundations of the house. 7, 8, 9. My fingers tightened around the brass key as the chiming continued. 10, 11. The final chime, 12, rang out with such force that I stumbled backward, colliding with the edge of the bed. As the sound faded, I became aware of something else. My breath was now visible in front of my face, forming small clouds that dissipated into the air. The temperature in the room had plummeted within seconds. What had been comfortably warm was now freezing cold. I shivered violently. My still, damp clothes no longer just uncomfortable, but painfully chilling against my skin. The candles that lit the room began to behave strangely. Their flames, which had been flickering gently, now stretched horizontally, all pointing directly at me as if drawn by some invisible force. They grew longer, reaching toward me like fiery fingers. I backed away, clutching the key in my fist. What was happening? How could candle flames all bend in the same direction? Against physics? Against nature? Then I heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps directly above my head on the 3rd floor. I froze, listening as they moved across the ceiling. They paused, then started again, their path mirroring my earlier movements down the hallway. I took a step to the left. The footsteps followed, moving left. I stepped right. The footsteps above did the same. My heart pounded against my ribs as I recalled checking all the visible staircases earlier. I'd confirmed the 3rd floor access was locked. No one could be up there. And yet someone, or something, was clearly moving in response to me. The footsteps stopped directly above where I stood. A long, terrible silence followed. Then came a new sound. the slow, deliberate creak of weight being placed on the first step of what must have been a staircase leading down to my level. Another step, and another. Whatever was up there was coming down. Pure, instinctive fear shot through me. I shoved the brass key into my pocket and ran for the bedroom door, yanking it open and bolting into the hallway. The candles along the corridor walls flared as I passed them, their flames reaching toward me like they wanted to grab me. I sprinted toward the main staircase, taking the steps 2 at a time as I fled back to the first floor. My only thought was escape, getting out of this house and away from whatever presence had awakened when I took the key. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I glanced back up. The landing remained empty, but the footsteps had resumed. They were following me down, growing quicker with each passing second. I turned away and ran toward the entrance, the brass key a heavy weight in my pocket. Whatever this place was, I needed to get out. Now. I rushed through the foyer toward the front entrance, my footsteps echoing loudly on the hardwood. The brass key felt heavy in my pocket as I grabbed the door handle and pulled with all my strength. It wouldn't budge, not even an inch. I twisted the knob and pushed instead. Nothing happened. The door remained firmly shut, as if it had been sealed or nailed in place. I stepped back, breathing hard, and threw my shoulder against it. Pain shot through me, but the door didn't even rattle in its frame. "This doesn't make sense," I said aloud, my voice sounding thin in the massive entryway. It opened easily before. The footsteps from upstairs continued their steady approach. Whatever was making them had reached the second-floor landing now and would soon be at the main staircase. I ran to the nearest window, grabbing a heavy brass candlestick from a side table as I passed. The candle tumbled out, its flame extinguishing as it hit the floor. I swung the candlestick at the window with every ounce of strength I had. Instead of shattering, the glass absorbed the impact like rubber. The candlestick bounced back, nearly flying out of my grip. I tried again, aiming for a different spot. Same result. The glass flexed slightly but remained intact. The ticking of the clocks grew louder, even though I was nowhere near the room that housed them. The sound seemed to be coming from everywhere now, from the walls, the ceiling, the floor beneath my feet. I caught movement from the corner of my eye and spun around. Nothing was there. Then another flicker of movement on my other side. I turned again. Still nothing visible, but I could swear shadows were darting just at the edge of my vision, there and gone, before I could focus on them. Then came the whispers, soft at first, like the rustling of leaves, but growing steadily louder. Children's voices, high-pitched and frightened, speaking words I couldn't quite make out. The voices seemed to surround me, coming from nowhere and everywhere. My hand went to the brass key in my pocket. I clutched it tightly, its cold metal warming slightly in my grip. Whatever was happening had started when I took it. Maybe if I put it back. No. The thing on the stairs was still coming down. I could hear its heavy footsteps getting closer. Going back upstairs wasn't an option. I needed to find another way out. I dashed toward the back of the house, moving through the dining room with its still steaming meal that no one was eating. The whispers followed me, growing more insistent. They still sounded like children, but now seemed urgent, as if trying to tell me something important that I couldn't understand. Beyond the dining room, I found a large, old-fashioned kitchen. Cast-iron pots hung from hooks on the ceiling. A massive wood stove sat against one wall, its fire burning low but still providing heat. Everything looked like it belonged in another century, though maintained in perfect condition. I checked the back door next to the pantry, locked tight, just like the front. I tried the windows above the sink. They wouldn't break either. That's when I noticed something odd about the wall next to the pantry. The wallpaper pattern didn't quite line up in one section. It was subtle. I might not have noticed if I wasn't desperately searching for any possible escape route. I ran my hands along the wall, feeling for edges. There, a slight seam. I pushed, but nothing happened. I tried pulling. Still nothing. Then I remembered the key. I pulled it out and examined it more closely. It was old-fashioned, made of brass with a simple design, the kind that might open a door from another era. Looking carefully at the wall again, I spotted what I'd missed before, a tiny keyhole painted the same color as the wall to make it nearly invisible. The brass key slid in perfectly. I turned it and heard a soft click. A section of the wall, a hidden door painted to match its surroundings, swung inward about an inch. I pulled it open wider, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. The air that wafted up was cold and damp, with a musty, unpleasant smell that made me recoil. I didn't have a choice. I had to go down. I grabbed a candle from a nearby holder, grateful it was already lit. The key wouldn't come out of the lock, so I left it there and stepped through the doorway, pulling the hidden door mostly closed behind me. The wooden stairs creaked loudly under my weight as I descended. I held the candle out in front, its small flame creating more shadows than light. The walls on either side were rough stone, slick with moisture. The whispers had followed me. If anything, they sounded clearer now, though I still couldn't make out the words. They had a pleading quality that made my skin crawl. The stairs ended at a dirt floor. I had entered what appeared to be a cellar or basement. The ceiling was low. I had to stoop slightly to avoid hitting my head on the exposed wooden beams. The temperature down here was significantly colder than upstairs, and I shivered in my still damp clothes. The walls were stone, with moisture seeping through in places, creating dark streaks that glistened in my candlelight. Ahead of me stretched a corridor with doorways leading off to either side. I moved forward cautiously, checking each room as I passed. They were mostly empty, with packed dirt floors like the corridor. One contained a few broken pieces of furniture, a chair missing a leg, a small table with a cracked top. Another held stacks of empty wooden crates. The whispers continued, seeming to lead me onward toward the back of the basement. As I walked, I noticed the dirt floor giving way to stone flagstones, worn smooth by years of foot traffic. The corridor ended at a T-intersection. The whispering seemed to be coming from the right, so that's the way I went. This new passage was narrower, forcing me to turn sideways in spots. The ceiling dipped lower too, and I had to bend almost double in some places to avoid scraping my head. Finally, the passage widened again into a small antechamber. In the far corner stood a heavy wooden door. It was partially open, with darkness beyond. The whispers were loudest here. Desperate. Insistent. They seemed to be coming from behind that door. I approached slowly, holding my candle higher. The door was made of thick, dark wood reinforced with iron bands. It looked ancient and heavily used. Deep scratches marked its surface, especially near the bottom, as if something had clawed at it repeatedly. I stood before the partially open door, my candle flame flickering in a draft coming from within. The smell that wafted out was worse than before, dank and unpleasant, with an underlying hint of something I couldn't identify, but that made my stomach turn. I pushed the heavy wooden door wider, raising my candle to illuminate what lay beyond. The flame cast long shadows across the room, and in that flickering light, I saw something that made me stumble backward with a strangled cry caught in my throat. Bones. Small, fragile human bones. Everywhere. The remains of children lay scattered across the stone floor or propped against the walls. Some were complete skeletons, while others were partial, jumbled together in disturbing heaps. Most horrifying of all were those still chained to the walls, iron shackles encircling their tiny wrist bones. Some still wore rotting fragments of clothing, small shoes with broken buckles, the tattered remains of what might have once been dresses or shorts. I pressed my hand against my mouth, fighting the urge to vomit. The candle trembled in my grip, making the shadows dance across the macabre scene. "Oh my God," I whispered, the words barely audible even to my own ears. The whispers that had been following me suddenly grew louder and clearer, as though a barrier between worlds had fallen away. They were children's voices, young, frightened, and filled with desperation. "I'm hungry. Please, I want water. It hurts. The chains hurt. Where's my mama? She promised to come back. Help us. Please help us." The voices came from everywhere and nowhere at once. disembodied yet unmistakably present. Each word was distinct now, no longer the unintelligible murmurs I'd heard upstairs. The temperature around me plummeted so rapidly, I could see my breath forming clouds in front of my face. A layer of frost began to crystallize on the stone walls, spreading like delicate white fingers across the surface. I backed away from the doorway, unable to tear my eyes from the small skeletons. My mind struggled to process what I was seeing. Children had died here, been imprisoned, and left to die. The whispers, the house, the perfectly preserved rooms upstairs. Everything suddenly took on a new horrifying context. "I need to get out of here," I said aloud, my voice breaking. "Now!" I turned and ran back the way I'd come, down the narrow passage and through the larger corridor, my candle flame guttering wildly with my frantic movements. The whispers followed, growing more agitated, more insistent. The children's voices called after me, some begging me to help them, others warning me that he wouldn't let me leave. I reached the wooden staircase and took the steps 2 at a time, my breath coming in sharp, panicked gasps. When I reached the top, I shoved against the hidden door, but it didn't move. I pushed harder, throwing my shoulder against it, but the door remained firmly shut. "No, no, no," I muttered, setting the candle down on a step and using both hands to push against the door. "Come on!" I pounded my fists against the wood, then tried again to force it open with my shoulder. Pain shot through me, but the door didn't budge. It was as if something immensely heavy had been placed against it from the other side. That's when I felt it, a small, cold hand wrapping around my wrist. I jerked away with a shout, spinning around. There was nothing visible on the stairs behind me, but I had felt it, felt fingers gripping my skin with surprising strength. The sensation had been utterly physical, not like a chill or a brush of air, but like actual fingers. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice echoing in the stairwell. No visible response came, but another hand grabbed at my jacket sleeve, tugging downward. Then another seized the back of my shirt. More hands, small but strong, clutched at my arms, my clothes, my legs, all pulling me back down toward the basement. I fought against them, twisting and turning to break their grip. "Stop! Let go of me!" The hands were relentless. Though I couldn't see anything, I could feel each individual finger as they pulled and grabbed. I stumbled down several steps, my heel catching on the edge of one. The candle toppled over, its flame extinguished as it clattered down the stairs, plunging me into total darkness. The invisible hands grew more numerous, more insistent. They were everywhere now, tugging at my hair, pulling at my sleeves, wrapping around my ankles, all trying to drag me back toward that room with its grisly contents. "Please," I begged, fighting against their pull. "I can't help you if I'm trapped down here too." My pleas made no difference. If anything, the strength behind the pulls intensified. I gripped the stair railing with both hands, trying to anchor myself against their collective force. In the pitch blackness, the whispers seemed to fill my head. "Stay with us. Don't leave us alone again. He's coming back. He always comes back. If you stay, maybe he'll take you instead." I kicked out blindly, feeling my foot connect with something solid, despite seeing nothing. A high-pitched cry echoed through the darkness. A child's cry of pain. I froze momentarily, horrified by what I'd done, but the brief hesitation allowed the hands to pull me down another 2 steps. "I'm sorry," I gasped. "I didn't mean to hurt you, but I need to get out. There must be another way out of here." I wrenched myself free from their grip with a desperate surge of energy and scrambled back up the stairs. The invisible hands clawed at my legs, but I kicked and thrashed until I reached the door again. I threw myself against it repeatedly, each impact sending pain through my shoulder and arm. The door remained immovable. The children's hands seized me again, their collective strength overwhelming. They dragged me down the stairs, my body bumping painfully against each step. I grabbed wildly at the railings, the walls, anything I could use to stop my descent. But my fingers found no purchase in the darkness. When I reached the bottom, I lashed out with renewed desperation. My hands connected with what felt like small bodies. though I still couldn't see anything in the absolute darkness. Each time I made contact, I heard soft cries or gasps, but the hands never stopped their relentless pulling. They were dragging me back toward the room with the skeletal remains. I could feel the direction of their pull, sense the terrible purpose behind it. Whatever waited for me there, I knew with bone-deep certainty that I couldn't allow myself to be taken there. There has to be another way out, I said aloud, trying to think through my panic. Houses this old often had multiple exits from the basement, coal chutes, root cellar doors, something. I planted my feet and fought against the pulling with all my strength. For a moment I broke free, and in that brief respite I turned and ran, not toward the stairs where the invisible children clustered most densely, but along the main corridor, searching blindly with my hands extended in front of me. The hands grabbed at me again, but I kept moving, pushing through their grip. My fingers traced the cold, damp stone walls as I moved, searching for any seam, any hint of another exit. The whispers grew angry now, some pleading, others threatening. The temperature dropped even further until each breath sent pain through my lungs. "I want to help you," I gasped as I felt my way along the wall. "But I can't do anything if I'm trapped down here too." My hand suddenly found empty space where wall should have been, a small alcove or recess I hadn't noticed before. I turned into it, feeling the children's hands clutching with renewed vigor as I tried to escape their reach. My fingers explored the alcove, touching cold stone and feeling for any hint of escape. The invisible children's hands continued to pull at my clothes, my limbs, trying to drag me back toward that room of small bones and endless suffering. Their whispers grew more frantic, a chorus of pleading and threats that swirled around me in the pitch blackness. As I pressed deeper into the alcove, my outstretched hand brushed against something different. Not the rough stone of the walls, but a smooth, flat surface. I ran my palm across it, tracing its outline. It was glass, a window. My heart jumped. I patted the area around it, feeling a wooden frame. The window was small, positioned near what must have been the ceiling of the basement, likely just above ground level outside. In the darkness, I couldn't see anything through it, but the mere presence of a window meant there was a way out. I stretched up on my tiptoes, fingers exploring the edges of the window. It felt sealed shut, painted over multiple times. Something wet and sticky coated my fingertips as I traced the glass. Paint, I realized. The window had been painted black from the inside. The children's hands tugged harder at me, as if sensing my discovery. Their collective strength was becoming harder to resist. Small fingers dug into my arms with surprising force, pulling me inch by inch away from the window. "No," I growled, planting my feet and resisting their pull. "I'm getting out of here." I needed something to break the glass. Blinded by darkness, I crouched and felt around the floor of the alcove. My fingers brushed against something solid. What felt like a broken piece of wooden furniture, perhaps a chair leg or table support. I grabbed it, testing its weight and sturdiness. Standing again, I swung the makeshift weapon at where I believed the window to be. I heard a solid thunk as wood hit glass, but the window held. The children's grip on me tightened, more hands joining in, clawing at my back and legs. I swung again, harder. Another thunk, followed by the promising sound of cracking glass. The whispers around me rose to shrieks of alarm. "He's leaving!" "Don't let him go. If you leave, he'll come for us again." On my third swing, the window shattered. I felt glass raining down on my upraised arm, small cuts stinging my skin. Cold, fresh air and the smell of rain rushed in through the broken window, a stark contrast to the musty, death-filled atmosphere of the basement. The children's screams intensified, becoming a cacophony of terror and rage. Their invisible hands clutched at me with renewed desperation, pulling at my clothes, my hair, wrapping around my ankles. I reached up and grabbed the window frame, ignoring the jagged glass that cut into my palms. Pain shot through my hands as I pulled myself upward, using all my strength to lift my body toward freedom. Rain spattered through the broken window, hitting my face with blessed coolness. The brass key weighed heavily in my pocket. As I struggled to pull myself up, I felt it slip out, falling with a soft clink to the stone floor below. I almost reached for it instinctively, but then remembered what had started when I took it. Let it stay here, I thought. Let it stay with them. I pulled harder, feeling glass slice deeper into my palms. Warm blood made my grip slippery, but the fear of what waited behind me gave me strength I didn't know I possessed. I got my head and shoulders through the window, rain immediately soaking my hair and face. Outside was dark, but I could make out wet grass just below the window. That's when something seized my left ankle. This grip was different from the children's hands, stronger, adult-sized, with crushing force that made me gasp in pain. It wasn't the collective strength of many small hands, but a single, powerful grasp that felt like it might snap my bones. "You do not leave my house," a deep voice growled from the darkness below. It wasn't a child's voice. It was a man's, rich with authority and menace. Terror gave me one final surge of strength. I kicked back hard with my right foot, feeling it connect with something solid despite seeing nothing there. The grip on my ankle loosened just enough, and I pulled with every muscle in my body, dragging myself through the window frame. I tumbled to the wet ground outside, landing hard on my side. Rain poured down, instantly soaking me again. I scrambled to my feet, slipping in mud, and ran blindly away from the house without looking back. My cut palms burned with each movement. Blood mixed with rain, dripping from my fingers as I ran across the lawn and into the trees. Branches whipped at my face, roots threatened to trip me, but I didn't slow down. The mansion might have been impossible to leave through its doors, but I had found its weak point, a forgotten window that its ghostly guardians hadn't sealed completely. I crashed through underbrush, following no path, driven only by the need to put distance between myself and that house of horrors. Eventually, I broke through the tree line and found myself back on the road where my car had stalled hours earlier. Only then did I turn to look back. The mansion stood on its small hill, dark and silent in the rain. No lights shone from any window. It looked abandoned and forbidding, nothing like the warm, inviting place that had first lured me in. Lightning flashed, illuminating its stone walls and steep roof for a brief moment before darkness swallowed it again. I turned away and began walking down the road, holding my bleeding hands against my chest. The rain had lessened to a steady drizzle, but I was already soaked to the bone and shivering with cold and shock. My car was nowhere to be seen. Either it was too dark to spot it, or I had emerged from the woods at a different section of road. I walked for what felt like forever. Time blurred as I put one foot in front of the other, following the road that had to lead somewhere eventually. My mind kept returning to the room of small bones, the whispers, the invisible hands. I wondered who the man with the crushing grip had been. The mansion's owner? The one who had imprisoned those children? After what must have been 2 hours of stumbling through the dark, my legs burning with exhaustion, I saw lights ahead. As I drew closer, I made out the glowing sign of a gas station, its fluorescent lights a beacon of normality after the nightmare I'd escaped. I limped into the station's small convenience store, dripping water onto the linoleum floor. A woman looked up from behind the counter, her eyes widening as she took in my appearance. Soaked clothes, bleeding hands, face scratched from tree branches. "My God, what happened to you?" she asked, rushing around the counter. "I need help," I managed to say, my voice hoarse. "My car broke down, and I got lost in the storm." She guided me to a plastic chair near the coffee station. "I'm Karen Wilson. You're bleeding pretty badly." "Jeff Elliott," I replied automatically. "I need to call someone, the police, maybe." Karen grabbed a first aid kit from behind the counter and opened it on the small table next to me. "Let me see those hands first, then we'll call. What happened to them?" "Glass," I said simply, too exhausted to explain more. She cleaned my cuts with antiseptic wipes, her movements efficient and gentle. I winced as the chemicals stung my open wounds. "These might need stitches," she said, wrapping gauze around my palms. What were you doing out in this storm anyway? Driving home. Car died about 2 hours back down the road. I paused, then added, I found a house, a big old mansion back in the woods. Karen's hands stilled for a moment before resuming their bandaging. There aren't any mansions around here. There is. Big Victorian place, 3 stories, stone and timber. I was there. I just escaped from it. She gave me an odd look but didn't argue. Let me call the police. Officer Sutherland lives nearby. He can be here in minutes. True to her word, it wasn't long before a police cruiser pulled up outside, lights flashing but no siren. A man in uniform stepped inside, shaking rain from his coat. He was tall with an athletic build, his dark eyes immediately assessing me as he approached. Officer Cody Sutherland, he introduced himself. Karen says you've had some trouble tonight. I nodded, holding up my bandaged hands. Car broke down in the storm. I found shelter in a mansion back in the woods, but, something was wrong with the place. Very wrong. Sutherland pulled out a small notebook. Tell me exactly where this mansion is. I described the location as best I could, how far down the road I'd been when my car stalled, which direction I'd headed through the trees, how long I'd walked before spotting the lights. When I finished, he closed his notebook and exchanged a glance with Karen. Mr. Elliott, I know every inch of this county. I've lived here my whole life, he said carefully. There is no mansion where you're describing. Nothing but empty fields and woods for miles. That's not possible, I insisted, sitting up straighter despite my exhaustion. I was just there. I can show you. We can look for your car in the morning when it's light, Sutherland offered. But I'm telling you now, there's no mansion there. Never has been, at least not in my lifetime. I stared at him, unable to process what he was saying. I knew what I'd seen, what I'd experienced. The mansion had been real. The room of bones had been real. The invisible children pulling at me had been real. The cuts on my hands were certainly real. You don't understand, I said, my voice rising. I was there. I saw things. Children died in that house. Their bones are still there. Sutherland's expression softened into something like pity. It's been a rough night. You're exhausted, probably in shock. Let's get you to the hospital to have those hands properly treated. We can sort everything else out tomorrow. I wanted to argue more, to make him believe me, but the events of the night crashed down on me all at once. Exhaustion swept over me like a wave, and I found myself nodding in surrender. What good would it do to fight now? Better to rest, recover, and then find a way to prove what I knew to be true. As Sutherland helped me to his cruiser, I glanced back down the dark road I'd traveled. Somewhere out there, that mansion stood, with its room of clocks, its pristine bedrooms, its basement of bones and whispers, and something inside it I was certain was furious that I'd escaped. I barely slept at the motel where Officer Sutherland had dropped me after my hospital visit. The doctor had cleaned my cuts more thoroughly, applied proper dressings, and given me tetanus shots and antibiotics. 7 stitches in my left palm, 5 in my right. My hands throbbed beneath their white bandages as dawn broke, pale light filtering through the thin motel curtains. When Sutherland knocked on my door at 8 in the morning, I was already dressed and waiting. "Ready to go find this mansion of yours?" he asked, his tone gentle but skeptical. I noticed he wore his full uniform and had his camera hanging around his neck. "Yes." My voice came out rough from exhaustion. "It's real. You'll see." The drive back to where my car had stalled was quiet. I sat in the passenger seat of Sutherland's police cruiser, watching the scenery through the window. Everything looked different in daylight, more ordinary, less threatening. But the memory of what I'd experienced remained sharp and vivid in my mind. "Somewhere around here?" Sutherland asked as we drove down the country road. I scanned the roadside. "Slow down. I think... Yes, there." I pointed with my bandaged hand. "That's my car." Sure enough, my blue Honda sat exactly where I'd left it, pulled over to the shoulder, Seeing it validated part of my story, and I glanced at Sutherland, who nodded in acknowledgement. "Let's check it out," he said, pulling his cruiser behind my abandoned vehicle. We got out, the morning air cool, but nowhere near as cold as it had been inside that basement. The ground was still damp from the storm, mud sucking at our shoes as we walked to my car. I tried the door, unlocked, just as I'd left it. "Keys still in the ignition?" Sutherland asked. I reached in and checked. "Yes." He made a note in his small notepad. "Okay, so your car definitely broke down here. Where did you say you went after that?" I turned toward the trees, my heart beating faster as I spotted a gap in the foliage. There. I saw lights through there and followed them. Sutherland looked doubtful but nodded. "Lead the way." We pushed through the wet underbrush, branches dragging across my jacket. Every step felt like walking back into a nightmare, but I needed to prove what I'd seen was real. After several minutes of walking, I spotted something ahead. "Look," I said, pointing. "The gravel path." Sure enough, a winding gravel pathway cut through the trees, just as I remembered. Sutherland's expression changed slightly, surprise flickering across his features before his professional mask returned. "Let's follow it," he said. We walked along the path, gravel crunching beneath our feet. My tension grew with each step, anticipating the moment when the mansion would come into view. The trees thinned, and we stepped into a clearing. I stopped so suddenly that Sutherland nearly bumped into me. Where the mansion should have stood was nothing but an empty field. Tall weeds and wildflowers swayed in the morning breeze. No stone walls, no timber beams, no steep roof or tall windows. No mansion at all. This can't be right," I said, walking forward in disbelief. "Jeff," Sutherland said quietly behind me, "there's nothing here." No, it was right here. 3 stories tall. Victorian style. I was inside it. My voice rose with each word, echoing my growing panic. I spun in circles, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The clearing was roughly the size that the mansion's footprint would have been, but instead of polished floors and grand staircases, there was only tall grass and muddy ground. That's when I noticed something in the center of the field, a stone pillar about waist high. I walked toward it, drawn by some inexplicable pull. It was a historical marker, weathered and stained with age. Sutherland came to stand beside me as I began to read the bronze plaque. On this site stood the Hartley Mansion, 1892-1934, property of Tyler Stevens, who operated the Hartley Home for Orphaned Children from 1901 to 1934. In March 1934, authorities discovered that 12 children had been chained in the basement and left to starve to death. Stevens took his own life before facing trial. The mansion burned to the ground 2 weeks later under mysterious circumstances. This marker stands as a memorial to the innocent lives lost. I read it again, unable to process the words. Then a third time, running my fingers over the engraved letters as if touch might change their meaning. "Tyler Stevens," I whispered. Sutherland was watching me carefully. "You mentioned that name last night. How did you know about him?" I shook my head, my thoughts spinning. I didn't know his name specifically, but I heard him. That deep voice in the basement saying, "You do not leave my house." That must have been him. I looked back at the marker, and I saw them. The children, their bones. They were chained to the walls in the basement. "Jeff," Sutherland said gently, "the mansion burned down almost 90 years ago. Then how do you explain this?" I held up my bandaged hands. "Or this?" I pulled up my pant leg to reveal the dark bruises circling my ankle. 5 distinct finger marks, where that powerful hand had grabbed me. Sutherland stared at the bruises, then took out his camera and began photographing my injuries. "I can't explain it," he admitted, "but I've lived in this county my entire life, and there's never been a mansion here during my lifetime." "You believe me, though, don't you?" I asked, searching his face. You can see I'm not making this up." He lowered his camera and sighed. "I believe you experienced something. Your injuries are real, and you certainly didn't get them from falling in the woods." He gestured to the finger-shaped bruises. "No branch did that." We stood in silence for a long moment, the implications hanging between us. "I'd like to file an official report," I said finally. "Something happened here, and it should be documented." Sutherland nodded. "I'll file it, but under cause all I can put is unknown. No one would believe... well, you know." "I know," I said quietly, taking one last look around the empty field where I knew, with absolute certainty, a mansion had stood the night before. As we walked back to the road, I kept turning to look over my shoulder, half expecting to see the house materialize behind us. But there was nothing but empty field and the lonely historical marker. Back at the station, I gave my full statement. Sutherland recorded everything methodically, though I could tell from his careful wording that he was phrasing it in a way that wouldn't immediately mark it as the ravings of a lunatic. When we finished, he closed his notebook and looked at me seriously. "What will you do now?" he asked. I hadn't thought beyond proving what I'd seen. "Get my car fixed, I guess. Go home." He nodded. "Listen, Jeff, whatever happened to you last night, it might be best to put some distance between yourself and this place." I took his advice. 6 months later, I was living in an apartment 2 states away. New job, new town, new beginning. I told myself I was moving for a better opportunity, but deep down, I knew I was running. It didn't help. Most nights I woke at exactly 12 o'clock to the sounds of ticking clocks and crying children. Sometimes the sounds came from my dreams, sometimes from the darkness of my room. The doctors called it PTSD, prescribed medications that dulled the edges, but never silenced the whispers completely. Worst were the times I felt the weight of the brass key in my pocket, the key I had left behind on the basement floor. I would reach for it, certain it was there, only to find nothing but empty fabric. Yet, the sensation persisted, a phantom weight that seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. I lived with the knowledge that I had escaped something the children couldn't. 12 innocent souls, chained and forgotten. Their suffering so profound, it echoed across nearly a century. I hadn't helped them. I'd run away, saved myself, and left them behind in their eternal imprisonment. The guilt of that knowledge followed me like a shadow, one that grew longer and darker with each passing day.